The air was heavy with silence, broken only by the soft sobs of a young boy standing near a freshly dug grave. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the cemetery, but the warmth of the light did little to ease the chill in his heart. His sister's name, carved into the cold stone, stared back at him, reminding him of the void she had left behind. He clutched the edge of his shirt tightly, trying to stop his hands from trembling, but the weight of his new reality was too much to bear. People had gathered around, offering quiet condolences, their words blending into a murmur that didn't reach his ears. His mind was elsewhere, replaying the moment when he had last seen her smile, a memory now tainted by the knowledge that it would never happen again. She had been his anchor, the one who kept the family together after their father walked away. And now, she was gone too. His gaze shifted to his younger siblings standing a few feet away, their small faces pale and frightened. They didn't understand the depth of what had happened. They were looking at him now, their wide eyes filled with questions he didn't know how to answer. A wave of helplessness crashed over him as he realized he was now their only support. He felt like a boy pretending to be a man, expected to carry burdens far heavier than his shoulders could bear. As the last of the visitors began to leave, one of the neighbors patted his shoulder. "You're strong, son," the old man said. "She believed in you." Those words stung, more like a reminder of what he couldn't afford to fail at than a comfort. He nodded politely, even though his heart screamed in protest. He didn't feel strong. He felt lost. When the cemetery was empty, he stood there alone, staring at her grave. The evening shadows grew longer, and the chill in the air deepened. He whispered under his breath as though she could still hear him. "I don't know how to do this, I'm scared." His voice cracked, and he quickly wiped away a tear, ashamed of his own weakness. For a fleeting moment he thought he saw a faint glow around the grave, a soft golden shimmer in the fading light. He blinked, dismissing it as his imagination, but the feeling it left behind was undeniable, like a quiet reassurance that he wasn't as alone as he felt. As night fell and the graveyard was cloaked in darkness, the boy reluctantly turned to leave. His siblings waited for him at the entrance, their small hands clutching each other tightly. The sight of their fragility ignited a flicker of determination in his heart. They needed him, and despite the fear gnawing at his resolve, he couldn't abandon them. The walk back to their modest home was quiet, each step heavy with the weight of uncertainty. The house felt emptier than ever, the absence of his sister's presence a deafening silence. Her laughter had once filled these walls, her voice a constant reminder that they could endure anything as long as they were together. Now, the echo of her absence felt like a wound that would never heal. He guided his siblings to the small kitchen, trying to distract them with simple tasks. "Wash your hands. I'll make something to eat," he said, his voice steadier than he expected. But as he rummaged through the sparse pantry, the reality of their situation hit him again. There wasn't much food left, and no one to guide him on what to do next. His sister had always managed these things, keeping them fed and cared for despite their struggles. He prepared a simple meal of bread and tea, setting it before his siblings with a faint smile. "Eat up. We need to be strong," he said, though the words felt hollow. As they ate, he couldn't help but think about how quickly everything had changed. Just weeks ago, he had been a boy, free of these burdens. Now, he was a caretaker, a protector, and a provider all at once. After dinner, he tucked his siblings into bed, their small faces etched with exhaustion. He lingered by their bedside, watching as they drifted off to sleep. They looked so peaceful, their innocence intact despite the storm that had uprooted their lives. He envied their ability to rest, even if just for a moment. He returned to the dimly lit living room, sitting down heavily on the worn-out couch. His mind raced with thoughts of what to do next, how to keep the family together, how to make ends meet, how to honor his sister's memory while stepping into a role he didn't feel ready for. His hands trembled as he held his head, a silent prayer escaping his lips. And then, just as his eyes closed in exhaustion, he felt a strange warmth in the room. A faint glow seemed to flicker near the window like the soft light he had seen earlier at the grave. It was fleeting, barely noticeable, but it stirred something within him, a fragile hope that perhaps, somehow, his sister's spirit was still watching over them. The next morning the boy woke early, the remnants of the strange glow from the previous night still lingering in his mind. The house was quiet, except for the soft breathing of his siblings in the next room. He stood by the window, gazing out at the world beyond, a world that seemed indifferent to their pain. His heart felt heavy, but he knew he couldn't let despair consume him. His sister wouldn't have wanted that. As he prepared breakfast, his youngest sibling toddled into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Brother, will we be okay?" she asked in a tiny voice, her words stabbing at his heart. He crouched down to her level, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. "Yes, we'll be okay. I promise," he said firmly, though he wasn't entirely sure himself. Her eyes searched his for reassurance, and she nodded, trusting him completely. After breakfast, the boy decided to visit the town to look for work. He instructed his siblings to stay home and lock the door, reminding them not to answer for anyone. As he walked through the streets, he felt the weight of judgmental stares from neighbors. They whispered among themselves, their pity and curiosity evident. He ignored them, focusing instead on the task at hand. He approached shopkeepers and laborers, offering to do any job they had, no matter how small. Most turned him away with apologies, but one elderly shopkeeper paused, eyeing him thoughtfully. "You're the one who lost his sister recently, aren't you?" the man asked. The boy nodded, his voice caught in his throat. "I don't have much to offer, but I need someone to clean and organize my storeroom. It's hard work, but it pays enough for a meal or two." Grateful for even the smallest opportunity, the boy accepted. He spent the next several hours working tirelessly, lifting heavy crates and dusting shelves. The work was grueling, but it gave him a momentary escape from his grief. By the time he finished, the shopkeeper handed him a small bundle of coins and a loaf of bread. "Take care of your family, son," the man said kindly. As the boy made his way back home, his thoughts turned to his sister once more. She had always been the one to shield them from the harsh realities of life, carrying burdens they never fully understood. Now it was his turn to bear the weight, and he wondered if he could ever be as strong as she had been. When he reached home, he found his siblings waiting eagerly by the window. Their faces lit up when they saw the bread, and their excitement brought a bittersweet smile to his lips. That evening, as they shared the meal, he told them stories of their sister, how she used to sing to them, how she always found a way to make them laugh even during the hardest times. The memories brought both tears and laughter, binding them together in their shared loss. Later that night, as he lay in bed, the glow returned. It was brighter this time, illuminating the room with an ethereal light. He sat up, his heart pounding, and followed it to the window. Outside in the distance he could see the faint outline of the graveyard. The light seemed to emanate from his sister's grave, beckoning him. Fear and curiosity warred within him, but he couldn't ignore it. Something was calling him, and he needed to find out what. The boy's hands trembled as he stepped outside into the cold, silent night. The soft glow in the distance was mesmerizing, almost hypnotic. It seemed to pulse with a strange rhythm, as though it were alive. He clutched a small lantern tightly, its dim flame flickering against the darkness. His footsteps crunched on the gravel path as he made his way toward the graveyard. The air was heavy, laden with an eerie stillness that made his breath hitch. As he approached the graveyard gates, the glow intensified, bathing the surrounding headstones in an unearthly light. He pushed the rusty gate open, its creak echoing into the night. His sister's grave stood in the center, radiant and otherworldly. The boy hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to turn back, but something deep within urged him forward. When he reached the grave, he noticed something unusual, a faint inscription glowing beneath her name. It wasn't there before, he was sure of it. Leaning closer, he squinted to make out the words, "The bond of family transcends all, even death." A chill ran down his spine as he read it aloud. The moment the words left his lips, the glow dimmed, and the graveyard plunged into darkness. A whisper broke the silence. It wasn't harsh or frightening, but soft, almost comforting. "You're stronger than you think," it said. The boy froze, his heart racing. He recognized the voice instantly. It was his sister's. "You'll make it through, little brother. Take care of them like I took care of you," the voice continued, its tone filled with love and reassurance. Tears welled in his eyes, and he collapsed to his knees beside the grave. "I don't know if I can do it," he whispered, his voice cracking, "I'm trying, but it's so hard." The voice responded gently, "You already are. You're doing more than you realize. Just trust yourself." As the voice faded, the glow returned briefly, softer this time, enveloping him in a warm, comforting light. He stayed there for what felt like hours, the heaviness in his heart lifting just a little. When he finally stood, he felt a newfound resolve. His sister's words echoed in his mind, strengthening his spirit. On his way back home, he noticed something strange. The once ominous graveyard didn't feel as foreboding anymore. It seemed peaceful, almost serene, as though the light had banished its darkness. By the time he reached his door, the lantern's flame had burned out, but he no longer needed it. His sister's words were now his guiding light. Inside, his siblings were still asleep, their faces calm and untroubled. He sat by their beds, brushing a strand of hair from his youngest sister's face. "We'll be okay," he whispered, more to himself than to her. This time, he believed it. In the days that followed, the boy carried his sister's words like a shield against his doubts. He started waking up earlier than before, quietly preparing meals and ensuring his siblings had everything they needed for school. The mornings were chaotic, but he managed them with a patience he never knew he had. Each evening he would sit by the flickering light of a single candle, sorting through bills and writing plans to make ends meet. But the nights were the hardest. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on his young shoulders. He would often find himself standing by the window, staring at the dark sky, asking silent questions. Why did his sister have to leave? How could he take on so much when he was just a boy? Yet whenever he felt like he was drowning in despair, her voice would echo in his mind. "You're stronger than you think." One particularly cold evening, the boy decided to visit her grave again. It had become a ritual, a source of quiet solace amidst the chaos. As he approached the graveyard, he noticed something unusual. A small bundle of flowers placed on her headstone. They weren't from him, and he knew his siblings hadn't been there. A wave of curiosity mixed with unease washed over him. Who had left them? That night, as he knelt by the grave, he spoke aloud to her. "Someone else remembers you too. Someone cared enough to come here," he said softly. The thought warmed his heart, yet it also stirred questions. Could it have been a friend? A neighbor? He sat there, his fingers tracing the edges of her name on the cold stone, lost in thought. As he turned to leave, something caught his eye, a faint trail of footprints leading away from the grave. They were fresh, barely visible in the moonlight. Without thinking, he decided to follow them. The trail led him through the graveyard, weaving between headstones until it stopped abruptly near the old caretaker's shed. The door creaked open slightly and a dim light spilled out. Summoning his courage, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was filled with old tools and dusty shelves, but what drew his attention was a small photo resting on the workbench. It was of his sister, smiling brightly, holding a younger version of himself in her arms. Beside it was a crumpled piece of paper. He unfolded it with trembling hands and read the words. "She was like a daughter to me. I miss her too." Tears blurred his vision as he realized the caretaker had been the one leaving the flowers. His sister had quietly touched so many lives, even ones he never knew about. In that moment, he felt a strange mix of sadness and pride. She had left a legacy of kindness and love, and it was now his turn to carry it forward. The revelation in the caretaker's shed gave the boy a new perspective on his sister's life. She wasn't just his sister. She had been a guiding light to others, even in silence. The thought both comforted and saddened him. He left the shed with a heavier heart but a stronger resolve. Her memory was alive, not just in his heart but in the quiet gestures of others who had been touched by her. The following weeks were filled with challenges. He worked tirelessly, juggling his own schoolwork with the needs of his younger siblings. He took on odd jobs wherever he could, from delivering groceries to cleaning the local library. The days were exhausting, but he refused to let the weight of it crush him. At night, he would sit by the gravesite and talk to her, sharing his fears and victories. The grave became a sanctuary, a place where he could find the strength to keep going. One night, as he sat there, he noticed something unusual. The flowers on her grave, which he hadn't replaced in days, seemed fresh, as if someone had just placed them there. He touched them, the petals cool and dewy, and looked around the dark graveyard. For a moment he felt a presence, a warm, comforting sensation that wrapped around him like an embrace. It was fleeting but undeniable. Was it his imagination, or was she still watching over him in some way? The next morning he found a letter slipped under the door of their small home. It was addressed to him, written in a familiar yet unfamiliar handwriting. The letter read, "She believed in you, and so do I. Keep going. You're making her proud." There was no signature, no clue as to who had sent it, but the words filled him with a renewed sense of determination. As days turned into weeks, his efforts began to pay off. His younger siblings were happier, their laughter returning to fill the once silent house. The community noticed his hard work and began offering help in small ways. A neighbor would bring over a warm meal, the shopkeeper would let him take groceries on credit. These gestures reminded him that he wasn't as alone as he had felt. Still, the mystery lingered. Who was leaving the flowers? Who wrote the letter? He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching over him, ensuring he didn't falter under the burden he carried. It wasn't until one fateful evening during a particularly heavy rainstorm that he found the answer. As he made his way to the grave, determined to replace the flowers that had likely been washed away by the rain, he saw a figure standing there. Cloaked in a dark raincoat, the figure seemed to be arranging something on the headstone. The boy froze, his heart pounding. Gathering his courage, he called out, "Who's there?" The figure turned slowly, and under the dim light of the stormy sky he saw an elderly woman with kind eyes. She stepped forward, the rain dripping from her coat. "I'm someone who owed her a debt of gratitude," she said softly. The boy's breath hitched. "You knew her?" The woman nodded, her voice steady despite the rain. "She helped me when I had no one. She was a daughter to me when mine had left me. I've been trying to repay that kindness in any way I can." The boy felt a lump in his throat as he listened. His sister's kindness had reached farther than he ever imagined, and now, in his darkest moments, it was coming back to him, piece by piece.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.